6 months and 12 days after Robert died, I walked into my advisor's office thinking we were going to talk about my pension, and walked out knowing my only son had stolen nearly £2 million from me. I want you to sit with that for a second. Imagine your own child doing that. And while you picture it, if you haven't already, tap that like button. So this old woman's little war story reaches a few more people who might need the warning. David's office is one of those glass and chrome places in the city, the sort of room where money pretends to be clean. The air smelled of coffee and printer toner, and the rain streaked the windows in gray ribbons over the gherkin. I remember thinking how small David looked behind his desk, his tie slightly crooked, fingers steepled too neatly. "Thanks for coming in, Sarah," he said, and his voice had that careful tone people reserve for cancer and funerals. I should have known then. He had a folder already open, my name clipped on top, spreadsheets, bank statements, lines of numbers marching across the page like a language I'd never bothered to learn because my husband and my son had always spoken it for me. Robert used to sit at the kitchen table with his reading glasses low on his nose, tapping away at an old calculator. He'd built his construction business for 40 years like that, brick by brick, pound by pound. When he died of a heart attack in our kitchen, halfway through a crossword, I honestly thought the worst had already happened. I was wrong. David slid a sheet towards me. "I need you to look at some patterns," he said, "before we talk about anything else." It wasn't the numbers that made my stomach turn. It was the dates. 8 years worth of withdrawals, transfers, reallocations, all highlighted in sickly yellow. 10,000 here, 20 there, 400,000 in one obscene lump 2 years before. On the week Robert went in for surgery, another 200,000. The Christmas he'd been in hospital with pneumonia. "Those dates," I said, my voice coming out thin. "They're wrong." David swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed like he'd rather be anywhere else. "They line up with your husband's major admissions," he said quietly. "Every time you were at the hospital, or he was recovering, large sums were moved. The paperwork used your signatures. Only they aren't your signatures, Sarah." There it was, a neat cluster of squiggles that looked like my name and Robert's, but stiff, too straight. The rhythm off. I'm not an expert, but I know the way my own hand shakes slightly on the M when I'm tired. This was a stranger wearing my handwriting like a mask. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room went slightly distant, like the sound had been turned down. My son, John, the considerate one, the clever with money one, the one who'd told me over and over not to worry my pretty head, had been forging my name while his father was in a hospital bed. Total I managed. David hesitated, then turned his screen towards me. A neat figure sat at the bottom of the column. £1. 9 million. Next to it, what was left, about £2. 3 million in various accounts, plus the house, plus the untouched life insurance that hadn't yet paid out. I could have collapsed, cried, screamed, wailed that my boy would never. I think that's what David expected. He was already reaching for the box of tissues. Instead, I did something that surprised both of us. I started to count. Not the money I'd lost, the money I still had. 2.3 million. The house Robert had paid off in grim, determined installments. The policy we'd never even told John about. Years of Robert's careful labor. Yes, but still something. Still weapons. Because that's what they became in that moment. Those numbers. Not cushions. Not comfort. Weapons. David watched me, uneasy. "Sarah, are you all right? We can take a break." "No," I said, and heard the steel in my own voice. It was the same tone I'd used when Tyler tried to flush Barbie heads down the loo. "We're not taking a break. We're taking control. If it were you, honestly, Would you have walked out and confronted your son straight away, or would you have done what I did, sat there and quietly declared war? I straightened the papers so they lined up perfectly. First, I said, you cut him out of everything. Today, any authority, any logins, any mandate with his name on it, gone. David blinked. We'd usually notify. We're not usually anything. I snapped. You call the banks. You change the passwords. And you do not tell John until it's done. Then you print me 10 years of statements and put them in a box I can carry. And after that, you're going to help me report this. Report, to whom he asked, though he already knew. To whoever deals with financial crime, I said, I don't care if it's the city police or the National Crime Agency. My son has stolen from vulnerable, elderly clients before. I guarantee it. He practiced on us because he knew we wouldn't look. He's not going to do it again. That was the moment I stopped being a widow and became something else. Victim turned strategist. Mother turned accuser. By the time I left David's office, the rain had stopped. The sky over London was that washed-out white that makes everything look like a photograph from the 70 seconds. I walked to the bus stop because I didn't trust myself behind a wheel. In my bag, the box of records thumped against my hip like a heart. Back at home, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Robert's chair still sat by the window, his last crossword folded on the arm. 3 empty squares waiting for answers. I lowered the box onto the coffee table and, for a moment, let myself sag into his seat. I'm sorry, love, I whispered to the empty room. You thought he was looking after me. So did I. Then I switched on the lamp, pulled out the papers, and turned our sitting room into a war room. Bank statements fanned across the table, highlighter lines, my own scribbles in the margins, dates, amounts, little arrows pointing to words like hospital and surgery. I opened my laptop and, for the first time in my life, really looked at John's life the way he presented it to the world. Instagram, John and Ashley clinking glasses on a terrace in what looked like Santorini. New BMW on the drive. A refurbished kitchen with an island the size of my first flat. Emma in a pristine tutu, tagged at some elite ballet school in Kensington, where the fees alone could have paid our council tax for a decade. Ashley's Facebook was worse. Marbella beaches, ski trips. So proud of my hard-working husband providing this life for us. I scrolled and scrolled, the rage rising with every pixel. John's practice was respectable, but not that respectable. Not villa in Tuscany and a watch that cost more than my car, respectable. If you've ever gone down a social media rabbit hole to confirm what your gut's already telling you, you know that sour feeling, don't you? When the filtered photos stop looking pretty and start looking like evidence. The phone rang just as I was screen-grabbing a post of Emma at a ballet intensive in Paris. John's name lit up. My thumb hovered. I let it ring twice, 3 times, then answered with what I hoped was my usual, slightly weary hello, love. Mum, he said, all warmth and concern. I was just thinking about you. How did it go with David? I pictured him in his office, that carefully casual shirt, the expensive watch peeking just enough from the cuff, the I've got you smile he'd used to soothe me after Robert's funeral. I wanted to scream into the receiver. Instead, I let silence hang for a fraction too long, not enough to spook him, just enough to make him feel it. Everything all right? He prompted. You know, it's complicated. All those investments. I keep telling David to go easy on you with the details. I'm sure you do, I said mildly. We talked through some things. He's making a few changes. Changes. The word came out too quickly, tripping over itself. What sort of changes? Oh, just routine security. I lied. It tasted bitter and perfect at the same time. New passwords, consolidating accounts. You know how it is. All these scams about. There was a tiny pause, half a heartbeat where the mask slipped and the panic flashed through. You wouldn't notice it unless you were listening for it. I was listening for it. Right, he said. The warmth dialed back up. Of course, I'll swing by next week. Go over it all properly with you. No need to worry. I'd actually like to understand it myself, I replied, tracing my finger along a highlighted withdrawal. The big transfers, especially. The ones during Dad's illnesses. Another flicker of silence. Mum. Those are complex structures. Higher yield products. Foreign funds. It's not really something we can cover on the phone. Maybe after you've had some grief counseling. You've been through a lot. There it was, the first attempt to put me back in my box. To turn rational questions into a symptom. Yes, I said, I've definitely been through a lot. We ended the call with the usual meaningless pleasantries. Seconds later, a WhatsApp from Ashley pinged through, all emojis and sweetness. Hi, Sarah. John says you met with David. Please don't stress. We're here to help you with everything. No need to worry yourself unnecessarily. Coordinated, of course. I screenshotted that too. By the time the streetlights flickered on, my living room looked like something off a crime documentary papers. Photos of luxury holidays, screenshots of smug captions. I knew I needed another pair of eyes, someone who wasn't blood. So I picked up the box, shrugged on my coat, and walked 2 doors down to Margaret. Margaret has lived on this street longer than any of us. Widow, sharp as a knife, smokes like she's daring the universe to try again. She opened the door in her slippers, took one look at my face, and said, "Kettle or gin?" "Both," I said. My voice cracked on the word. Her kitchen smelled of frying onions and cheap air freshener. We cleared a space on the table, pushed aside yesterday's paper, and I emptied the box. Numbers and dates spilled out between the salt and pepper. I told her everything. The forged signatures, the hospital dates, the Instagram holidays, John's little pauses on the phone, Ashley's pat on the head message. Margaret listened, her cigarette burning forgotten between her fingers. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "That calculating little sod," she said. "He's been treating you like a client he can fleece, not his mother." "I feel like an idiot," I admitted. "I just trusted him." She shook her head. "That's not idiocy. That's what decent people do. He's the one who's broken." We sat there, 2 old women in a council-ish semi, plotting like gangsters. By the time the tea had gone cold, we'd given it a name. Operation Full Disclosure. Not just about getting my money back. Not just about punishment. About making sure everyone who needed to know knew. His regulator, his clients, his precious golf club, the fancy ballet school that liked his checks so much. No more hiding behind family business. Tell me, if it were your son, would you keep his crimes tucked away to protect the family name, or would you burn his shiny little world down like we planned that night? The next morning, David called with a contact Detective Inspector Rebecca Morrison, Economic Crime Unit. Apparently, when an elderly widow walks in with 8 years of tidy paperwork and a cooperative advisor, people sit up. I went into the city again, but this time it wasn't to be managed. Morrison met me in a small interview room that smelled of coffee and photocopier ink. A notepad poised, dark hair scraped back, eyes that missed nothing. I laid out my box on another table. Statements, screenshots, power of attorney documents, the forged signatures. "My son," I said, and the words felt foreign in my mouth, "has been stealing from us for 8 years. I think he's been doing it to other people too." She leafed through the pages, her expression tightening, the way Roberts used to when a subcontractor tried to cut corners. "This is thorough," she said. "We'll need to corroborate with the banks, but there's a strong paper trail." "Will he know," I asked, "that I've come to you?" "Not yet," she said. "If we open a serious fraud investigation, we'll need to interview him, obtain warrants, freeze assets. For now, the most useful thing you can do is act normal. Don't confront him alone. Let him think he still has control, so he doesn't destroy evidence or move what's left. Act normal. Carry on like my son hadn't been waiting for his father to die so he could empty the accounts." I stared at the pile of paper that represented 40 years of my husband's early mornings and bad knees. Somewhere behind it, I could see Emma's ballet shoes and Tyler's school blazer, paid for with stolen money. And beyond them, darker shapes, widows, dementia patients, people who didn't have a Margaret or a David or the nerve to walk into a police station. Morrison's voice cut gently through my thoughts. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have to ask. If this progresses to charges, it will be public. Your son could face prison. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Robert's unfinished crossword, of the dates highlighted yellow, of John's practiced pause on the phone, and Ashley's no need to worry with a heart at the end. "Yes," I said. My throat burned, but my voice was steady. "If I don't stop him, who will?" On the way home, the bus rattled past John's office, all glossy glass and his name in tasteful lettering. I looked up at it and felt something inside me click coldly into place. I was going to smile at my son. I was going to sit at his table. I was going to let him pour me wine and explain, in that patient little voice, how he had everything under control. And all the while, I'd be handing his world, brick by brick, to the people who could take it apart. Stay with me, because what I did next turned Sunday dinner into the opening move of a war he never even saw coming. The smell of garlic and rosemary hit me the second Ashley opened the door. This was the Sunday I walked into my son's beautiful, stolen house and smiled like nothing was wrong, while the fraud squad quietly sharpened their knives in the background. You ever had to play happy families with someone you're quietly preparing to destroy? If you have, you already know that particular flavor of adrenaline. It's not fear. Exactly. It's something colder. "Sarah, you made it." Ashley beamed, air kissing my cheek. Soft cashmere, perfect blow-dry, diamond studs winking in her ears. Those earrings alone were probably one of the emergency transfers I'd highlighted in yellow. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and stepped inside. The hallway was like a magazine spread pale oak floors, skylights, a console table with a vase of lilies that smelled faintly of funerals. My coat went onto a designer hook that cost more than our entire first-bedroom furniture set. Once upon a time, I did what I'd promised myself I would do. I priced everything. The enormous corner sofa in the living room, $3, maybe $4,000. The art on the wall, all abstract squiggles and muted colors, another few thousand. The kitchen, when we walked through, almost made me laugh. Marble island, wine fridge, built-in coffee machine, taps that probably dispensed sparkling water. If you whispered nicely, I could see Robert, grease under his nails, staring around with that slow, skeptical look he reserved for flash plasterers. Asterisk, how much did he charge you for this, then? Love asterisk. Ballet's going so well, Ashley was saying as she fussed with serving dishes. Emma's teacher says she's a natural. Oh, we got the final invoice for the summer intensive in Paris. But John sorted it. Of course he had. I leaned against the cool marble and watched the domestic ballet Ashley plating up roast potatoes. Emma, floating in, wearing leggings and a bun so tight it pulled her eyebrows upwards. Tyler trailing behind with his phone, thumbs flying. John opening a disturbingly expensive bottle of red, label angled just so, because there's always an audience. Even if it's only his mother. He kissed my cheek. That same familiar aftershave and charm. Mum, you look well. See, I told you getting on top of the finances would make you feel more secure. I said, and let my eyes flick very briefly to the watch on his wrist. A gleaming thing with a face like a small planet. I'd seen it once in a jeweler's window in town. 12,000 pounds. I remembered because Robert had scoffed. If I ever pay more than 50 quid to know what time it is, he'd said, you have my permission to roll me into the canal. We sat at the table, candles lit in the middle, the food genuinely lovely. Ashley always could cook. They said grace. Emma mumbling. Tyler picking at his peas. The whole scene would have looked wholesome on Instagram number Sunday roast number family time. Under the table, my hands were clenched so tight my knuckles ached. So, John said, carving beef. David mentioned you'd had a good chat. Everything clearer now. I took my time cutting my meat. Clearer. I agreed. He was very helpful. We did a bit of housekeeping. Ashley shot John a quick look, then plastered on a smile. We were saying how lucky you are to have John to handle the tricky bits. All those online scams, it's so important to have someone who understands it. I put my fork down, very gently. Yes, trust is everything, isn't it? For half a second, his eyes met mine. He saw something there. I know he did, but he didn't know what it was. Not yet. After lunch, Ashley drifted off to fuss in the kitchen. Tyler disappeared upstairs. Emma perched in the lounge, stretching her impossibly long legs while some American ballet video played on the TV. John cleared his throat. Mum, do you want to come into the office? He asked. We can look at your monthly outgoings, see what we can simplify. Might help you feel less anxious. There it was, the next move. His home office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who thought of himself as successful. Dark wood desk, leather chair, framed certificates on the wall, a shelf of financial books no one has ever actually read. And on the desk, a neat stack of papers already prepared, what he wanted me to see. He pulled my chair out for me. So, he said, flipping through, this is the basics. Council tax, utilities, groceries, a bit of contingency. You're not extravagant. Mum, you're fine. The investments are where the complexity lies. But as I keep telling you, you don't need to worry about that. That's what I'm here for. He slid a spreadsheet towards me. It was all small numbers. 100 here, 200 there. Nothing about the hundreds of thousands that had vanished during hospital stays. I looked down at it, then up at him. Funny. I said, David seemed to think I should know my own passwords. The tiniest flicker. Again, if I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. His smile stiffened. Did he? Yes. Routine security. He called it very sensible. So now I can log in and see everything myself. I folded my hands on the desk. Isn't that reassuring? He sat back in his chair. The atmosphere shifted, like the air had thickened. Mum, I'm all for transparency, he said, carefully. But this is quite complex stuff. Hedge funds, overseas bonds. It's not just logging in and checking a balance. You could easily misunderstand and upset yourself for no reason. Then explain it to me, I said, calm, almost bored. I brought my notebook. Something in him didn't like that. The corner of his mouth twitched. Another time, he said, too quickly. I've got calls this afternoon. Let's start with the basics. Shall we? Those transfers you were asking David about, they're just reallocations between products. Honestly, Mum, you're letting grief make you suspicious. Have you thought any more about counseling? There it was again. That quiet little dagger times, you're fragile, you're not thinking straight. Leave the grown-up things to me. Tell me honestly, would that have worked on you, or would it, like it did in me, flip something from hurt to pure? Icy fury. I smiled. I'll think about it, I said. Speaking of calls, aren't you going to be late for your next one? He glanced at his watch and swore under his breath. Damn. Give me 2 minutes. I just need to pick up a client voicemail. Wait here. Yeah. He left the office, pulling the door half closed. Not quite shut. Not enough to click. I've been a wife and mother long enough to know when a door is being left accidentally not quite shut. But he'd forgotten something in this house. I was no longer the one meant to be managed. I got up, padded to the crack, and listened. His voice was lower, snapped down. Nothing like the gentle tone he used with me. She's asking questions, he hissed. David's bloody changed the passwords. No, I can't access anything now without going through him. Yes, I know what that means. We need to be careful. Just don't move anything until I've worked out what she's seen. A pause. The muffled sound of someone, Ashley, I assumed, on the other end. She's 70. Ash, he said, frustration leaking out. She won't understand half of it. I'll fob her off. Just keep her calm. All right. I stepped back to the desk, blood roaring in my ears, and sat down again. By the time he came back in, I had the same bland, slightly puzzled expression on my face. Sorry, he said. Tone switched back to soft and dutiful. Where were we? Oh, I said lightly. You were explaining how I should leave everything to you because I'm old and fragile. He laughed, as if I'd made a joke. Don't be ridiculous. We wrapped up the lesson with nothing resolved. I let him think he'd succeeded in kicking the can down the road. As I walked home later, past the rows of smaller, normal houses, I rang D.I. Morrison from the bus stop. The winter light was already fading. My reflection in the shelter glass looked harder than I remembered. I've just been to my son's house, I told her. He's nervous. He knows passwords have changed. He's still trying to gaslight me. And he's telling someone else we need to be careful. That aligns with what we're seeing, she said. We've obtained cooperation from several banks. There are multiple suspicious transfers to entities that don't match any legitimate funds. At this point, we're preparing search warrants and a restraint order on his accounts. My hand tightened around the phone. What does that mean, in plain English? It means, she said, that we're nearly ready to knock on his door. But we want to do this properly. Home, office, devices, the lot. Early morning, minimum chance of him destroying evidence. I looked down the road, towards the vague direction of his shiny house. Kids on scooters whizzed past. Oblivious, tell me when, I said. I'll make sure he's home. He likes predictable routines. A week later, he rang again. Mum, I've been thinking, he said, that faux casual tone wound tight over panic. Why don't you come into my office on Friday? We'll go through everything. Properly. Just the two of us. I'll show you all the accounts. Full transparency. Would that help? Oh, I said, letting just a hint of relief leak in. That would put my mind at rest. Yes. He had no idea that by then, Morrison already had draft warrants on a superintendent's desk. Friday morning, I dressed like the sort of woman who could be easily patronized. Floral blouse, sensible shoes, the old navy coat that made me look smaller. I carried my handbag with the notebook and pen. Like a good little pupil, his office was all glass. Brushed aluminium, white orchids in reception. The receptionist smiled at me with that practiced warmth you give to clients' mothers. John appeared, hand on my elbow, guiding me through to a conference room rather than his usual office. On the table, There were 3 neat stacks of paper in glossy folders. Right, he said, clapping his hands together. Let's clear this up, shall we? These are your portfolios. You're a wealthy woman. Mum, nearly 4 million in diversified investments. You really don't need to worry. He pushed the first folder across. I opened it. On the surface, it looked reassuring. Logos of big, respectable institutions. Graphs with upward lines. Account numbers. Balances. But here's the thing. Once you've spent nights sitting in your late husband's chair matching dates and numbers, you start to see patterns. And, more importantly, you recognize when something times doesn't times match. That's odd, I murmured. What is, he asked, a fraction too fast. These account numbers, I said, tapping a page. They don't line up with the ones David showed me last week. Different endings. Different banks in some cases. He smiled. Condescending. David will have shown you the wrapper accounts. These are the underlying funds. It's technical. You're cross-wiring things. I tilted my head. That must be it. I reached into my handbag and took out my phone. Who are you calling? He asked. David, I said, hitting dial. On speaker, so we can all be on the same page. You don't mind, do you, after all? Full transparency. His jaw clenched. Mum, there's no need to. I pressed the speaker icon. The ringing filled the room, bouncing off glass and chrome. David Chambers, came the familiar voice. David, it's Sarah, I said, keeping my tone light. I'm with John, looking at my portfolios. He's very kindly printed out some account statements. I just wanted to check something. A beat of silence. Of course, David said cautiously. What would you like to check? I read out one of the account numbers, digit by digit. Could you tell me if that matches anything on your system? The pause this time was different. Shorter. Sharper. No, he said. That account number doesn't exist on any of the portfolios I manage for you. Nor do the others. You emailed me earlier this week. I could feel John's eyes burning into me. You emailed him, he said, voice low. Oh, yes, I said, smiling pleasantly. I sent him copies of all this yesterday, just for his files. Sarah, David went on. I think it's important you know that the documentation I've seen from you and what we hold here are inconsistent. These appear to be fabricated statements. Fabricated, I repeated. The word tasted like metal. I clicked off speaker and ended the call. For a second, no one spoke. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. John's face had gone pale under his tan. What the hell do you think you're playing at? He whispered. I was going to ask you the same, I replied. 8 years of quietly bleeding us dry wasn't enough. You had to sit here and hand me fairy stories on glossy paper. His chair scraped back. You don't know what you're talking about. You and David are confusing things. And now you've got it into your head that, don't, I said, and my voice shocked even me. It was low, hard, entirely done. Do not, for one more second, talk to me like I'm senile. He opened his mouth, but I cut across him. I have spent the last month going through every statement, every transfer, every forged signature with detectives who times know what they're talking about. The City Fraud Squad has your name on a file. They have your pattern. And now they'll have a nice little appendix about you fabricating paperwork to try and cover your tracks. He stared at me as if I'd slapped him. You went to the police, he said, flat. Yes, I said. I went to the police. Because you didn't just gamble with our retirement. John, you gambled with our lives. You stole while your father was in surgery. You forged my name while I was crying in hospital corridors. And I am not the only one. Am I? Something flickered behind his eyes then, not remorse. Not yet. but the horrible calculation of a man trying to work out whether to keep lying or change tactics. "You're my mother," he said, as if that were some sort of spell. "You'd really see me in handcuffs, in court. You'd see Emma and Tyler's dad in prison." I thought of Emma's ballet shoes, Tyler's blazer, the photos of their holidays. I thought of the other names Morrison had hinted at: widows, dementia patients, people with no one to fight for them. "I'd rather see you in prison than see one more vulnerable person robbed blind because no one had the stomach to stop you," I said. "The investigators will be in touch with you soon." They wanted me to act normal. But frankly, I've had enough of pretending. I stood up, my knees cracked, but I felt as tall as I had on my wedding day. "You want transparency," I added. Hand on the door. "Here it is tomorrow morning, very early. Some very serious people are going to come knocking. They won't be as polite as I've been." I left him there, hunched over his fake papers, the glass walls of his beautiful office suddenly looking more like a display case. As I stepped back out into the cold air of the street, my phone buzzed with a text from D.I. Morrison asking if we could talk about timings. What I agreed to in that call would change the sound of John's front door forever. And trust me, you'll want to hear exactly how that played out. By the time my phone started vibrating itself across the bedside table at 615 a.m., they'd already put John in handcuffs. You remember that text from D.I. Morrison about timings? This was the result. The moment the quiet little investigation I'd started in my living room erupted into blue lights on his perfect street. I fumbled for my glasses, squinting at the screen. Ashley. 6 missed calls. Then another coming in. I answered on the 4th ring. All I could hear at first was screaming, not words. Just this raw animal noise. And in the background, a jumble of sound. Doors slamming, men shouting police, a child crying. Then Ashley's voice broke through, shredded with panic. "Sarah, they're here. There's police everywhere. They've taken his laptop. They've got guns." "They won't be guns," I said automatically. Sitting up, "Armed units don't usually—" "Ashley, listen to me. Breathe." I woke up and there were men in the hallway. She sobbed. "They banged on the door. They said they had a warrant. They're in his office. They've taken his phone. They're putting him in a van." What is happening? You know, that pause when you decide in one breath whether you're going to keep lying to someone or finally tell them the truth. That's what sat between her question and my answer. "Ashley," I said, and my voice came out steady, almost calm. "This is about the money. John has been stealing from us for 8 years. Nearly $2 million from me and Robert, and more from other people. The police have evidence. That's why they're there." She made a choking sound. No, he wouldn't. John's not. He forged our signatures during Robert's surgeries. I cut in. He moved money when I was sitting in hospital corridors. This isn't a misunderstanding. There was a clatter, like the phone had hit something, and then dead air. I sat there in the half-dark, duvet bunched round my waist, the house utterly still. Outside, the sky over our little row of semis was just beginning to pale, that colorless time of morning when the world feels thin. A minute later, my landline rang. Only one person still uses that. Margaret didn't bother with hello. "Turn on BBC News," she said. "Channel 231. Now." I padded downstairs, flicked on the telly, and there it was. Not a crime drama, not some American series, but my son's front door, live. The caption at the bottom read, "Times City financial advisor arrested in elder fraud prob." His perfect house looked strange under the TV cameras. The gray cladding had a greenish tinge. The front lawn trampled by boots. Police tape fluttered in the wind like cheap bunting. Officers in stab vests moved in and out. One of them carried a cardboard evidence box. Another, a desktop computer wrapped in plastic. Then the shot widened, and there he was, being walked out between two detectives. No jacket, hair messed up, no expensive watch on his wrist now. His hands were cuffed in front of him, chain glinting in the morning light. You ever seen someone you love in handcuffs on the news? Let me tell you, it's not something you forget. It's a punch to the gut and, in my case, a strange, cold kind of relief, all mixed together. Sources say the suspect's own mother came forward with documentation. The presenter was saying, pensioner Sarah Mitchell is understood to be one of several elderly victims in a multi-year fraud investigation. My name. On the screen, elderly. Margaret let out a low whistle down the phone. You always wanted to be on the telly, she said. Didn't think it'd be like this. Mind. I huffed out a laugh that tasted like salt. At least they spelled it right. We watched in silence as they bundled John into the back of a van. A neighbor I vaguely recognized hovered on the pavement, pretending not to stare. Dressing gown clutched tight. Somewhere off camera, a reporter shouted a question. John didn't look up. When the van doors shut, it made a sound like finality. Regrets, Margaret asked quietly. I thought of Robert, of yellow highlighted dates, of the forged squiggles where my signature should have been, of widows whose names I didn't even know yet. None, I said, and meant it. Of course, that was just the beginning. By 9 o'clock, the media vans had found the school. My mobile rang again, this time showing Emma's name. Emma never called. She lived on texts and Instagram. My stomach dropped. Gran, her voice wobbled. In the background, I could hear shouting. A tannoy. That peculiar echo of school corridors. There are reporters at the gates. They were taking photos and asking if my dad's a criminal. People are whispering, Tyler's gone mental. What do you mean, gone mental? I asked, already pulling on my trousers. He punched Callum Baker. She burst out. Callum said Dad's going to jail and will be on benefits like those people. There was blood everywhere. Mr. Hughes took them both to the office. Can you come? Of course, I said. Stay with your head of year. Don't talk to any journalists. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone film you if you can help it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I didn't tell her I'd never driven faster in my life. The school car park was chaos. Parents half-dressed, cameras at the outer fence, teachers trying to herd kids through side entrances. I went in through reception, gave my name, and was whisked into a small office that smelled of photocopying and teenage deodorant. Tyler sat in the corner, knuckles scraped, tie askew, eyes blazing. Emma perched on a spare chair, small and stiff, as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. The head teacher, Mr. Hughes, stood by the window, looking 10 years older than last term parents' evening. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, thank you for coming. As you may be aware, there's been coverage. Some of the pupils have seen it. There was an altercation. Call it what it was, Tyler muttered. He called Dad a thief and said Gran dobbed him in. So I hit him. I looked at my grandson, 13, shoulders hunched, trying very hard not to cry. My chest ached. Is Callum all right? I asked. A bloody nose and a shock. Mr. Hughes said, nothing broken. I've sent him to the nurse. Language. I told him automatically. Then realized what I'd said, and we both almost smiled. He sobered. I'm afraid this will be the first of several incidents. We'll support Emma and Tyler as best we can. But children can be cruel. And the press, I saw them, Emma whispered. They shouted my name. They knew my name. Gran. I pulled a chair closer and took her cold hand. Look at me, I said. She did. Eyes, huge, lower lip trembling. Your father has been arrested because there is evidence he did very serious things with other people's money. I said, choosing each word like it was glass. That is between him, the police, and the courts. It is not your fault. It's not Tyler's fault. It's not mine either, no matter what other kids repeat. Do you understand? Emma nodded, but tears spilled over anyway. And as for you, I turned to Tyler. You are not going to solve this with your fists. However tempting, you're better than that. I won't have you throwing away your future because he threw away his. He scowled at the floor. He deserves it if he did it. But no one gets to call you a grass pensioner. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to go and have a word with Callum's parents about their dinner table conversation. Instead, I squeezed his shoulder. Thank you for defending me. I said, next time, use your mouth, not your hands. You're sharp. Use that. On the drive back, Emma stared out of the window, chewing her lip. Tyler had his hood up, pretending indifference. As we turned onto my street, Emma spoke. Where are we going? She asked. Home. That depends what home means now, I said quietly. Because while all of this was happening, the other half of the machine had been grinding forward. Warrants don't stop at one front door. By late afternoon, Ashley was on mine. She looked nothing like the woman who'd served me perfectly crisp roast potatoes the week before. Mascara smeared. Hair a mess. Coat thrown over pajamas. She held a carrier bag with the dazed air of someone who'd grabbed random objects in a fire. They've frozen everything, she said, standing on my step as if afraid to actually cross the threshold. Our accounts, the business accounts, the credit cards. They said the house might be subject to confiscation as proceeds of crime. She mimed the phrase with shaky fingers. I don't even know what that means. It means, I said, that if a court decides the house was bought or renovated with stolen money, they can take it. Her face crumpled. I didn't know. Sarah, I swear to you, I didn't know. I thought he was just good at his job. I liked the holidays. I liked the kitchen. I didn't ask questions, and I should have. But I didn't know it was this asterisk. I believed her about not knowing the details. I also believed she'd enjoyed not knowing. Where are you staying tonight? I asked. She hesitated. My sister said we could come up to Manchester for a bit. But school, and the kids, and the press, I don't know what's best. I don't want them changing schools on top of everything. But I can't pay the mortgage. I don't even know if we're allowed to stay in the house. I looked past her, at Emma and Tyler on the pavement, clutching their bags. Emma's eyes flicked between us, trying to read the weather. Tyler stood with his jaw set, pretending he didn't care where he slept as long as he had Wi-Fi. Here's the thing, no one tells you about revenge if you're not careful. It hits the wrong people hardest. Come in, I said. Ashley's shoulders sagged. She stepped into the hallway like someone entering a church. In the short term, I went on, you can stay here. You and the children. There's the spare room and the office. We can make it work. But there are conditions. She nodded vigorously. Anything. You cooperate fully with the police. I said, no messages passed on. No covering for him. No misunderstandings about accounts. You tell them everything you know and everything you suspect. You don't lie to me. You don't lie in front of the children. And you never, ever suggest that this is somehow my fault for going to the authorities. Are we clear? She swallowed. Yes. And one more thing, I added. The children are not to be used as pawns. If John starts trying to send messages through them, you shut it down. This stops with us. Her eyes filled again, but this time there was something like resolve in them. All right, she whispered. All right. That night, my neat little house shifted on its axis. Emma's ballet bag ended up on Robert's old armchair. Tyler plugged his Xbox into the telly he used to only watch cartoons on. Ashley stood in my kitchen, baffled by my ancient cooker, and cried quietly over a pan of pasta. I lay in bed and listened to new breathing in the rooms around me and thought this, right here is why I can't back down. They deserve better than a father who builds castles on other people's bones. A week later, D.I. Morrison came round with another box of files and a face like thunder. "We've widened the scope," she said, perching on my sofa with her notebook. "You were right about there being others." She opened the folder and slid it towards me. Names, ages, little snapshots of tragedies. A widower in his 70s whose wife had died of breast cancer. A woman with early dementia whose son lived abroad. A couple who'd lost their only child in a car crash. "Your son appears to have identified clients going through bereavement or cognitive decline," she said, voice flat with professional disgust. "He offered to simplify their portfolios, then siphoned funds into shell companies he controlled. So far, we're approaching £8 million in suspected misappropriated assets. 8 million. I stared at the list until the names blurred. Each one of them had their own version of my yellow highlighted dates, their own kitchen tables, and unfinished crosswords. "Will they have to testify?" I asked. "Some, yes," Morrison said. "Others are too unwell, but they are watching what happens in your case very closely. Your decision to come forward has already encouraged 3 of them to speak to us. I thought you should know that." So there it was, the thing I'd started out of rage had become something else. A warning flare for people I'd never meet. A few days after that, there was a different kind of knock at my door. This one was crisp, measured, legal. When I opened it, a man in an expensively dull suit stood there, briefcase in hand. "Mrs. Mitchell," he asked. "My name's Patrick Sullivan. I'm representing your son." I didn't invite him in immediately. I made him stand on the step and explain himself first. Call it petty if you like. It felt right. "I'd like a word, if you're amenable," he said, "about the upcoming proceedings, and about how we might minimize the damage to everyone concerned." Everyone concerned, by which he meant John. Eventually, I let him sit at my kitchen table, the same one where Robert used to tap his calculator and where I'd spread the evidence out like a battle map. Sullivan took out a neat pad, folded his hands. "Your son is facing very serious charges," he began. "The evidence, as I'm sure you're aware, is substantial. We are exploring the possibility of an early guilty plea, full cooperation, and restitution." "Restitution," I repeated. He nodded. "Mr. Mitchell has access, via remaining investments, to sufficient funds to make your losses good, with interest. Potentially those of some other complainants as well. In cases like this, sentencing judges do look favorably on genuine attempts to put matters right, particularly where family is concerned." "And what," I said slowly, "does that have to do with me?" Sullivan's gaze flicked briefly to the side, then back. "Your victim personal statement will carry significant weight. Mrs. Mitchell, the Crown Prosecution Service listens to the wishes of primary victims in matters of plea and sentence. If you were minded to temper your language, to emphasize your son's remorse and prior good character, that could assist the court in imposing something short of the maximum." There it was, at last, a price tag on my silence. "Let me be very clear," I said. "You are asking me to trade the truth for a slightly shorter sentence for a man who stole from the dying and the grieving. In exchange, he'll give me back money he shouldn't have taken in the first place. I'm asking you to consider what your late husband might have wanted." Sullivan replied, "And what is best for your grandchildren. A man in prison for 15 years is not much use to anyone. And that, right there, is where my two identities collided, mother and citizen, granny and witness. The part of me that still saw John as the boy with grazed knees, and the part of me who'd watched him on the news in handcuffs. If it were you, honestly, would you take the deal? Because I sat there, fingers pressed against the worn wood of that table, and realized that whatever I said next would shape not just John's future, but Emma and Tyler's idea of what we stand for in this family. And I knew exactly what I was going to tell Mr. Sullivan, but that answer changed everything that followed. I looked Patrick Sullivan straight in the eye and told him no. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, you'll know that peculiar, painful relief I felt as the word left my mouth. He didn't like it. Of course, men like that aren't used to 70-year-old women in supermarket cardigans saying no to their carefully rehearsed offers. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, leaning forward, "I'm not sure you appreciate the consequences. Without your support for a more lenient approach, your son could be looking at 12 to 15 years. "I appreciate them perfectly," I replied. "What I don't appreciate is being asked to underwrite the idea that what he did was a lapse. He didn't nick a Mars bar as a teenager, Mr. Sullivan. He stole from the dying. He forged our signatures while I was holding my husband's sick hand. If a judge wants to be lenient, that's their decision. It won't be because I pretended this hurt less than it did." He tried again. "Your statement doesn't have to be dishonest, just balanced. You could talk about his work in the community, his role as a father. He can talk about that himself." I cut in. "My job is to tell the court what he actually did to us. Robert worked 40 years for that money. You want me to turn that into a footnote? No, absolutely not." Sullivan stared at me for a long moment, weighing up whether pushing harder would help. In the end, he snapped his folder shut. "Very well," he said. "I'll advise my client accordingly." As the door closed behind him, I let my shoulders sag. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the back of Robert's old chair. "Tell me honestly, would you have taken the deal? Full restitution. A shorter sentence. The pretense that this was all a sad misunderstanding. Or would you, like me, decide that sometimes justice is worth more than money?" That night, I had to explain it all over again, this time to the people living under my roof. Ashley was at the sink, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing out the lasagne dish as if elbow grease could fix her life. Emma and Tyler sat at the table doing homework they could barely focus on. I cleared my throat. "John's barrister came round today," I said. Ashley froze. "And he wanted me to agree to soften my statement." I said, "In exchange, John would make sure every penny he stole from us is repaid. With interest." Tyler's head snapped up. "So did you." Emma's eyes went back and forth between us, like a spectator at a particularly bleak tennis match. "No," I said, "I didn't." Ashley turned, dripping plate in her hand. "Sarah," she whispered, "they said he could get 15 years. If the judge throws the book at him. He's their father. And he did what he did knowing that," I replied, "being a father didn't stop him stealing. It didn't stop him targeting other people who had nobody. I won't pretend otherwise so he can shave a few years off his time." Tyler pushed his chair back, the legs screeching on the lino. "So we're just supposed to tell people our dad's a crook, and that's that," he burst out. "For the rest of our lives." I walked round the table and sat beside him. His jaw was clenched, a little muscle working furiously near his ear. "So like John, at that age, it made my chest ache. You can tell people whatever you like," I said gently. "What I'm going to tell you is this. You are not him. You didn't make his choices. The only thing that will define you long term is how you respond now. Do you look away when someone does wrong because they're family, or do you stand up even when it hurts?" He was silent for a moment, then, very quietly, "Do you hate him?" I thought about that, really thought. "No," I said at last. "I hate what he did. I hate that he built your life on sand and lies. But hate him, no. I'm just done covering for him. There's a difference." Emma's voice was small. "If you help send him to prison, you'll still love us, won't you?" That was the only time I nearly broke. "Oh, darling," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Nothing he has done or will do touches how I feel about you. You and Tyler are why I'm doing this properly. So you grow up knowing the grown-ups in your life value the truth more than a nice photo at Christmas. If you're still listening at this point, you're braver than some of my neighbors. A fair few of them couldn't even look me in the face once it all hit the papers." The months before the trial blurred into a strange routine. School runs, media vans, meetings at the Crown Prosecution Service offices, beige corridors, bad coffee, serious faces. That's where I met Prosecutor Collins properly for the first time. Barrister's wig in his bag, files under his arm, a tired kindness in his eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, glancing through my updated statement, "I won't lie to you. This is going to be hard. Cross-examination rarely feels fair, especially from your own son's side. But your evidence is central. Yours and Mr. Chambers. The pattern we build from your finances is what unlocks the rest." He tapped a different folder. "We've got 3 other victims willing to give evidence in some form. 2 will appear on video link, 1 in person. Several more are too frail, but we have their records. They all say the same thing: your decision to come forward made them realize what had happened to them wasn't just bad luck." "Is that meant to make me feel better?" I asked. He considered. "No, it's meant to make you understand the weight of what you're doing. This isn't just about you and your son anymore. Financial abuse of elders is under-prosecuted. This case will be watched." Later, in the quiet of my own living room, that thought lodged somewhere deep. Not times, just times about you and your son. Somehow, that made it both easier and heavier at the same time. And so we came to Crown Court. By then, it had been 8 months since Robert died. Long enough that the first rawness of grief had settled into something older and harder. Long enough for John to take on that thin, gray look people get in custody. The courtroom felt like a different planet. Dark wood, high ceiling, the royal coat of arms glowering down. The dock, with its glass screen, sat to one side. When they brought John in, for a second I didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight. The tan had faded, leaving his skin sallow. His hair, normally so carefully styled, grew unevenly over his collar. No suit today, just a plain shirt, dark trousers, no belt. He looked around as he took his seat in the dock. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. There was no hatred there, no warmth either. Just a sort of hollow acknowledgement, like 2 strangers who'd once lived in the same house. "Regina versus John Mitchell," the clerk intoned. And then it began. Collins opened for the prosecution with a measured, relentless clarity. He walked the jury through years of bank statements, the timing of transfers, the shell companies. David Chambers took the stand, explaining how he'd spotted the discrepancies, how he'd checked signatures and realized they were wrong. Then came the other victims, a widower with trembling hands, talking about how John had come to his house after his wife's funeral with helpful leaflets, a son speaking for his mother with dementia, explaining how her care home fees had suddenly become complicated until a social worker intervened. Each story laid another brick in the wall around my son. The defense tried. Of course, Sullivan rose in his wig and gown, smooth as ever. He asked whether perhaps some clients had misunderstood. Whether the losses might partly be due to market downturns, not malice. Whether grief had colored perceptions, but it was like trying to tape together a shattered vase with sellotape. Every time he smoothed over one crack, another jagged edge showed. And then it was Ashley's turn. She looked small and washed out in the witness box, wedding ring still on, fingers twisting. Sullivan had asked for her to give character evidence, but Collins called her as a factual witness first. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "did you ever ask your husband directly how he could afford your lifestyle? The holidays, the private ballet school, the renovations." She swallowed. "I asked in a vague way, joked about being a kept woman. He'd say things like, 'We're comfortable. I'm good at what I do. Trust me.' And I did. I liked our life. I didn't want to pick it apart." "Did you see bank statements?" Sometimes he'd scroll past things on his phone, show me balances. If I asked about large transfers, he'd say it was tax planning or moving between funds. I didn't understand the jargon, and I didn't push. "Looking back," Collins said gently, "do you feel there were warning signs you chose to ignore?" Tears welled. Yes, there were. I thought his parents must have been richer than they looked. I thought he must be some kind of financial genius. The truth is, I liked the kitchen and the holidays more than I cared about where every pound came from. And now my children are paying for that. Sullivan tried to soften it on cross-examination, emphasize her ignorance, her trust. But even he couldn't erase the image of a woman who'd been happy not to look too closely. And then, inevitably, it was my turn. I'd rehearsed that walk to the witness box in my head 100 times, but the real thing still made my knees wobble. The Bible felt oddly heavy in my hand as I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "Mrs. Mitchell," Collins began, "can you tell the court a little about your late husband?" "Robert." So I did. I talked about the early mornings, the van that refused to die, the packed lunches eaten in lay-bys. About the evenings he fell asleep in that chair with his boots still on, because he'd been on site since dawn. About how proud he'd been when he finally paid off the mortgage. "And when did you first become aware that something was wrong with your finances?" he asked. I walked them through David's office. The yellow highlighted dates, the forgery, the hospital admissions, the moment I realized my son hadn't just betrayed us emotionally but had planned around Robert's vulnerability. "Mrs. Mitchell," Collins said quietly, "some might say that a mother should stand by her child no matter what. Did you find it difficult to come forward?" I looked at the jury. Ordinary faces, a nurse, a student, a middle-aged man with flour on his cuffs who looked like he'd come straight from a bakery. "Of course I found it difficult," I said. "I would have given my life for that boy more than once. But there's a difference between loving someone and enabling them. If John had been nicking sweets from the corner shop at 12, I'd have marched him back and made him apologize. This is the grown-up version of that. He stole from people who trusted him, including us. Standing by him now means standing by his victims, not shielding him from consequences." Sullivan came at me with every trick in the book. Wasn't I bitter after losing my husband? Could grief have clouded my judgment? Was I perhaps overemphasizing the harm because I felt guilty for not spotting it sooner? "That's a fair question," I said at one point, and a murmur went through the public gallery. "Yes, I feel guilty. I didn't see it earlier. Yes, I'm angry." But anger doesn't put dates on statements. Grief doesn't forge signatures. Whatever's going on in my head, those numbers are what they are. You can dislike me and still see the maths. If you've ever had to face someone who wronged you with all their excuses lined up, trust me, there is a deep, fierce satisfaction in calmly refusing to budge. The trial lasted 10 days. 10 days of evidence, bank experts, tearful widows, Legal arguments none of us in the gallery fully understood. And then, suddenly, it was over. The judge sent the jury out just after lunch on the final day. We waited. Ashley twisted tissues into ropes. Emma sat frozen between us, knuckles white. Tyler stared at the floor. John sat in the dock, head bowed. They were gone for just under 4 hours. When they filed back in, I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The foreman, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, stood, hands trembling as she took the slip of paper from the usher. On count 1, the clerk read, fraud by abuse of position relating to Sarah and Robert Mitchell. How do you find the defendant? Guilty or not guilty? Guilty, the foreman said. Each count was the same. Fraud, false accounting, theft. The pattern repeated. Guilty, guilty, guilty. By the end, Ashley was sobbing openly. Tyler had tears on his cheeks he didn't seem to notice. Emma's face was blank, shattered porcelain. John closed his eyes. When the last verdict was read, he opened them and looked at me. Not accusingly, not pleading, just accepting, in a way I hadn't seen from him before. His Honor, Judge Williams thanked the jury and discharged them, then turned to the rest of us. Mr. Mitchell, he said, his voice level but cold. This court will now need to consider the appropriate sentence for offenses of considerable seriousness. I will adjourn for reports. You will be produced from custody for sentencing in 4 weeks' time. 4 weeks. 28 days for all of us to sit with what had just happened and imagine the shape of the future. As the dock officers moved to lead John away, he paused, just for a moment, and mouthed something I couldn't quite catch. Maybe it was sorry. Maybe it was thank you. Maybe it was nothing at all. What mattered was the boy I'd raised was now a convicted criminal, and in a month's time, a judge would decide how many years of his life he was going to spend behind bars. And I knew that when that day came, I would be in that courtroom again, not just as his mother, but as the woman who'd set this whole thing in motion. You can imagine, can't you, how heavy the air felt in my house that night as we waited for the day the judge would finally speak, the day the judge finally spoke. I woke up before the alarm, heart hammering like I'd already heard the verdict. You know that feeling when your whole life is balanced on someone else's next sentence? That was me, staring at the ceiling at 5 in the morning, wondering exactly how many years I'd just helped carve out of my son's future. The house was quiet in that loaded way, like it knew where we were all going. Emma's ballet bag sat by the door, neat as ever. Tyler's blazer hung on the back of a chair. Ashley had ironed her shirt 3 times the night before, as if crisp creases would hold her together in court. Over breakfast, nobody ate much. Toast went cold on plates. Cereal went soggy. Tyler just pushed things around with his spoon. Do we have to be there? He muttered. I'm not making you, I said. The judge will sentence your father whether we sit in that room or not. But if you want to hear it from him, not from some headline, this is your chance. Emma swallowed. He'll see us, won't he? Yes, I said. He'll see all of us. It's a lot. Isn't it asking children to sit in the same room where their father's freedom is being measured out in years? If you were me, would you have kept them home or brought them, like I did, so they'd never have to wonder what really happened? Crown Court looked the same as last time, too big, too cold, air smelling faintly of disinfectant and old wood. But the atmosphere was different. Trials are about questions. Sentencing is about judgment. We sat in the second row of the public gallery, Ashley between the children, me at the end. Margaret on my other side like my personal bodyguard in charity shop tweed. A few of the other victims were there too. The widower with trembling hands, the son of the woman with dementia. We nodded to each other. A tiny, Solemn club nobody wants to join. When they brought John up from the cells, he looked even smaller than during the trial. No wigged lawyers flanking him this time. No illusion of power. Just a man in a plain shirt, escorted by officers, stepping into the dock to hear how the story he'd written would now be edited by the state. Judge Williams adjusted her glasses. Shuffling papers. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, "please stand." He did. His hands gripped the rail in front of him, knuckles white. "This court has found you guilty of multiple counts of fraud, theft, and false accounting," she said, voice clear and carrying. "The facts are now a matter of record, and I will not rehearse them in full. However, there are aspects that must be emphasized before I pass sentence." She looked down at him, face impassive. "You were, by all accounts, a trusted financial advisor. Your clients, many of them elderly, bereaved, or otherwise vulnerable, placed in you a level of trust few professions enjoy. You exploited that trust and their grief to live a lifestyle you had not earned. You did not steal to feed a starving family or to keep a roof over your head. You stole to pay for luxury holidays, private schooling, kitchen renovations, designer watches. This was not a momentary lapse. It was a sustained, calculated course of conduct over many years. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ashley flinch at kitchen renovations. Judge Williams went on. "Of particular gravity is the abuse of your position in relation to your own parents. You timed substantial withdrawals to coincide with your father's hospital admissions and forged your mother's signature on documents while she was occupied with his care. That is cruelty of a high order." My throat tightened, but I kept my gaze steady. "There are, however, factors in your favor," she said. "You have, albeit late in the day, indicated a willingness to make full restitution. You have cooperated to some degree with the authorities in identifying assets. You have no previous convictions. I have also read your letter expressing remorse and acknowledging that prison is the consequence of your own choices, not some misfortune visited upon you by others. I didn't know about that letter yet. That came later." Taking all of this into account, Judge Williams concluded, "The offenses are so serious that only a substantial term of custody is appropriate. On the lead count of fraud by abuse of position, I sentence you to 12 years imprisonment. On the remaining counts, concurrent terms of lesser length. You will serve half in custody before being eligible for release on license, and you will remain subject to conditions thereafter. I also make a confiscation order under the Proceeds of Crime Act and a compensation order requiring full restitution to your victims." She paused, letting the numbers settle over us like dust. 12 years, Emma whispered, as if saying it quietly would make it less real. Tyler's jaw clenched. Ashley pressed a fist against her mouth. Judge Williams turned her attention briefly to us in the gallery. "I wish to commend Mrs. Mitchell for her courage in coming forward," she said. "It cannot be easy to bring such a case against one's own child. Her actions have undoubtedly prevented further harm to other vulnerable individuals. It's a strange feeling, being praised for something that's broken your own life in half. Like being handed a medal for amputating your own arm. Then it was done. The gavel didn't slam. That's only in films." The judge simply rose, bowed, and disappeared through a door. The court formally adjourned. Paper rustled. People stood. Some stared. John turned in the dock before they led him away. For a second, everything else blurred. It was just him and me, a pane of glass and 20 years of choices between us. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. This time, I saw it clearly. I gave him the smallest of nods. Not forgiveness, not absolution. Just a recognition that, at last, he'd stopped pretending this was something done times to times him. On the way out, One of the other victim's daughters touched my arm. "You did the right thing," she said, eyes shining. "Mum couldn't be here. But you did it for all of them." Outside the court, the cameras were waiting, microphones thrust forward. "Questions," shouted Mrs. Mitchell. "Do you feel guilty? Do you have a message for your son? Are you pleased with the sentence?" I squinted in the gray light, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "I feel tired," I said, "and I feel relieved that the court has taken what he did seriously. My message to him is the same as it's always been: you are responsible for your choices. We're responsible for ours." "You don't think 12 years is too harsh?" one reporter persisted. I looked straight down the lens. "He took more than 12 years of security from some of those people," I said. "They don't get parole from being old and frightened. So no, I don't." If that clip ended up shared on social media with strangers calling me savage grandma, well, there are worse legacies. We went home by bus. Of all things, it felt almost comical. 3 generations and one shell-shocked daughter-in-law on the 73, trundling through London with a carrier bag of legal leaflets. That night, we didn't cook. I ordered 3 large pizzas and told everyone to eat in the living room. No tablecloth, no ceremony. Just cheesy slices on paper plates and a silence full of things none of us really knew how to say. Eventually, Tyler spoke. "So that's it," he said. "Dad's in prison and we're here." "Yes," I said. "That's it for today. Tomorrow we still have school runs and bills and laundry. Life doesn't stop, however dramatic the headlines are." He picked at his crust. "I want to see him. Not now, but one day. I want to look him in the eye and tell him he messed everything up and I'm not going to be like him." Emma nodded fiercely. "Me too. I want to tell him I still love him, but I think what he did is disgusting." "Is that horrible?" "No," I said. "That sounds honest. And if there's one thing this family needs more of, it's that." "Would you have encouraged that if they were your grandchildren? Or would you have tried to shield them from seeing their father in that place?" I decided that sugarcoating had got us into this mess. The only way out was through the truth, however ugly. Later, when the kids had gone up and Ashley was rinsing plates, Margaret poured me a generous glass of wine. "Any second thoughts?" she asked. I took a sip and listened to the sounds of the house Emma's music upstairs, Tyler's low murmur on his headset, Ashley on the phone to her sister explaining the sentence. "No," I said. "If anything, I wish I'd noticed sooner. Maybe then some of those other names in the file wouldn't have been there." She nodded. "He made his bed. You just stopped him stealing the sheets off everyone else." 3 months passed. Life, in that funny way it has, settled into something almost normal. The media moved on to some other scandal. The kids went back to worrying about exams and TikTok trends. Ashley got a job at a local estate agent. She'd never worked full-time before, but it turned out she was good at talking about other people's houses rather than just showing off her own. We'd lost John's big place. Of course, it went in the confiscation order. Sold to help repay what he'd taken. Watching it on Rightmove, scrubbed of their photos, felt odd, like seeing a picture of your own wedding dress in a charity shop window. My own home, paid for with Robert's graft and now full of someone else's revision notes, became the new center of gravity. I was 67 and effectively starting again school gates, packed lunches, parents' evenings. It was exhausting and, in a strange way, exactly what I needed. Then, one Wednesday, the letter arrived. The envelope had the prison stamp on it. My hands shook slightly as I carried it to the kitchen table. For a minute, I just stared at my name in his handwriting, familiar loops. The way he pressed too hard on the downstrokes. I opened it. It wasn't long. No grand apologies. No manipulative declarations. Just John. stripped of his props and charm, finally speaking without a performance. He wrote that he was guilty completely, no excuses about markets or misunderstandings. That every day inside, he'd been replaying conversations in his head with clients, with me, with Robert, and seeing properly how cold he'd been. He wrote that when he heard my evidence and the others, something in him had finally cracked, not because he'd been caught, but because he could no longer pretend he'd been helping us. He said the judge's words about luxury and cruelty had been like a mirror he'd spent years avoiding. He said, and this is the line that did me in, that my refusal to lie for him in court was the only decent inheritance he'd ever given Emma and Tyler. They don't get a father at sports days for a while, he wrote, but they get to grow up knowing that in this family, the truth matters more than saving face. That's down to you, not me. He didn't ask me to visit. He didn't demand forgiveness. He just said that if one day the children wanted to see him, he would sit there and listen to whatever they needed to say. I folded the letter very carefully and went upstairs. In my bedroom, on the dressing table, sits a little jewelry box Robert bought me in Scarborough the year before John was born. The hinges squeak. The velvet is worn shiny where my rings have sat. Inside, on one side, is Robert's old watch. The cheap one. Not some designer nonsense. Scratched, battered, face a bit fogged with age. It still works if you give it a shake. On the other side, there is now a folded prison letter. Honest labor and honest consequences, side by side. The life we built and the ruin our son made of it. The man who taught him to work hard and the woman who finally taught him that there are lines you don't cross, even for your own child. People sometimes ask if I sleep at night, knowing I'm the reason my son is in a cell. I tell them the truth. I sleep better now than I have in years. Because revenge, when you strip away the drama and the headlines, isn't just about seeing someone punished. It's about taking back the story they tried to write over your life and putting your own name on it again. One day, when Emma and Tyler are ready, we'll walk into that prison and sit across from him. 3 generations at one table, and what I choose to say to him then, well, let's just say that part of the story is still being written.